Welcome, my friend. The storm rages outside, but here, in the quiet of this story, I invite you to find peace. Let the sound of the rain and the distant thunder guide you as you drift into a place of calm. This story is my gift to you, a gentle companion for a night of restful sleep. Relax, let go of the day, and let the story carry you into dreams. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the road ahead. My headlights barely cut through the fog, and the windshield wipers were working overtime, struggling to keep up with the downpour. I had been driving for hours, the dark highway stretching on endlessly before me, nothing but wet asphalt and shadows in every direction. I'd taken this route countless times. It was a shortcut I used to avoid the more crowded roads. But tonight something felt wrong. I glanced at the GPS. It showed a straight line, no turns, no detours. Is that all? Okay, let's move on. Thanks God. But the screen flickered for a second, like it was struggling to keep up. I frowned and tapped it again. Nothing. The map was static. No sign of any landmarks. No towns or signs of life. As I passed a faded mile marker, I noticed the road seemed different. There were no lights, no reflectors. The pavement felt old, cracked in places, and the fog, it was heavier now, pressing in on the truck, swallowing the road whole. Great, I muttered to myself, tapping the GPS once more, hoping to get some signal. Just what I need, some haunted highway in the middle of nowhere. I chuckled nervously, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I couldn't afford to be paranoid, but something about this stretch of road felt off. I hadn't seen another car in what felt like an hour, and the trees lining the road seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal hands, reaching out to touch the truck. The headlights flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed the brakes, the truck screeching as it jerked to a stop in the middle of the road. The engine sputtered before finally cutting off. A lump rose in my throat as I stared at the pitch-black void ahead of me, the world outside swallowed by the fog. I tried the ignition again. Now I can continue the story. Go on to the story. But the truck refused to start. Seriously, I groaned, banging my fist against the steering wheel in frustration. Come on. I popped the hood and climbed out into the rain, my boots sinking into the mud as I approached the front of the truck. The night was silent now, too silent. No animals, no wind, just the sound of the rain beating down on the earth. The engine looked fine. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I turned around, scanning the darkness. The trees were still. The air was too still. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the distance. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, but as I focused, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. A shadow, dark and motionless, staring straight at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, as though waiting for something. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding small against the vast silence of the night. No answer. I felt a chill run through me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I took a step back toward the truck, but the figure didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched. I scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door behind me. The truck still wouldn't start. The figure, whatever it was still standing there, unmoving, its presence heavy in the air. Suddenly, the headlights flickered again, and for a brief moment, I saw the figure closer. It had moved too quickly, too silently. That's when the fog rolled in. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Okay, how is the thunder? Love it. Let's go. As I stared at the spot where the figure had been standing. But now, the road was empty. The trees were still. It was as though it had never been there. I tried to shake off the creeping dread. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had I seen it? Was it real? The truck still wouldn't start. I twisted the key in the ignition again, but the engine remained silent. I looked around. The fog so thick now that I could barely see a few feet ahead. It felt like I was trapped in a dense, suffocating cloud, and my sense of direction was failing me. I couldn't see the road or the trees. It was just me, and this empty stretch of highway that felt more and more like a trap. Just get the truck started. Get out of here. This is just a bad night. Nothing more. But as I sat there waiting, hoping for the engine to hum to life, I realized the silence around me was unnatural. The kind of silence that felt heavy, almost alive. A silence that presses in on you and makes you question if the world is still turning. I pulled at the door handle, stepping out once more. The rain hit my face like cold needles, but I didn't care. I needed to get moving, find a way out of this place. The truck was useless now, and there were no signs of life for miles. As I walked away from the truck, I scanned the fog for any sign of movement. There had to be something, someone, the figure from earlier. It couldn't just be gone. It was too real, too solid to disappear. But maybe it was just my imagination. I stepped cautiously down the road, the rain making everything slippery, the mud pulling at my boots. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my gaze kept drifting back to the edges of the fog, expecting to see the figure lurking just out of sight. And then, just as I started to calm down, the fog parted. For a moment I thought I was seeing things. The figure was standing at the side of the road again, but this time, it wasn't still. It was moving. The figure was walking toward me. My breath caught in my throat. This time, it wasn't just standing there watching. It was coming closer, step by slow step, through the mist. It was the same shape, the same shadow, but now I could make out more details. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its form vague and featureless, swallowed by the fog, except for the faintest outline that shifted. A wave of unease hit me. Every instinct I had told me to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. I watched in frozen horror as the figure moved closer, closer, until it was within arm's reach. And then, it stopped. I stared into the fog where the figure had been, but it was gone. I looked around, my breath heavy, my heart pounding, but the mist closed in even tighter. I couldn't see anything now, not even the road in front of me. The figure was gone, but that's when I heard it. A sound, soft at first, but getting louder. Footsteps. I spun around, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued though, slowly, steadily. It was as if something was walking behind me, just close enough for me to hear, but not enough for me to catch a glimpse. No, this is insane. Just get back to the truck. I forced myself to turn and sprint back to the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the footsteps followed. They were there, getting closer, faster, like whatever was behind me was closing in. I reached the truck in a panic, fumbling for the door, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the handle. The footsteps were now right behind me, too close, too real. I twisted the key in the ignition again, but nothing happened. The engine was still dead. I could feel something watching me, something cold and unseen, just behind me, a shadow that hadn't been there before. The footsteps stopped, and there was an eerie silence once more. But then I heard a voice, a whisper, barely audible, coming from somewhere just beyond the fog. Turn around. The voice was soft but unmistakable, cutting through the eerie silence like a knife. The words echoed in my mind. Turn around. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, every muscle in my body locked in place. The fog swirled around me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if the voice had been real. It felt like my mind was playing tricks. Too much isolation, too much time in the rain. But then the footsteps came again, this time louder, closer, unmistakable. Turn around. The voice whispered again, this time clearer, more insistent, as if it had been waiting for me to respond. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I slowly turned my head. But I didn't want to look. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the truck, to drive away and never look back. I should have listened, but I didn't. The figure was there, not a shadow this time, not just a faint shape. It stood at the edge of the road, right outside the reach of my headlights, its outline dark against the swirling mist. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze cold, piercing. I took a step back, my breath shallow. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, but it was too late. I couldn't look away. The figure wasn't just standing still anymore. It was moving toward me, step by slow step. "You've been here before," it said, its voice deep and hollow, like the words were coming from the depths of a well. "You can't leave, not until you remember." The words hit me like a punch. I didn't understand. Remember what? I whispered to myself, barely able to hear my own voice over the pounding in my ears. The figure stopped just a few feet away. My body trembled. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed. The figure raised its hand slowly, its arm moving toward me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The fog had thickened, and now it seemed to press in on me, making everything feel claustrophobic. "Look at me." I didn't want to, but I did. The face, no. The lack of a face was more horrifying than anything I had seen before. It was just void, an empty space where a face should have been, dark and hollow, like the figure itself had no real shape. The void seemed to draw me in, pulling me deeper and deeper into it. I could feel it myself, drowning in it. The voice came again, its words cold and final. "You're one of us now. You've always been one of us." The moment the words hit the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The truck, the fog, the empty road, all of it began to bend, like the reality around me was warping, tearing apart at the seams. The figure's empty face filled my vision, its presence suffocating. I stumbled backward, my legs unsteady, my mind spinning. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I was still in the truck, wasn't I? The figure moved closer. "You can't escape. There's nowhere to run." I turned and sprinted back toward the truck, my heart racing, my thoughts a blur. But just as I reached the door, I felt something cold grip my shoulder. "I told you, you can't leave." The grip on my shoulder was ice cold, like the hand of death itself. My body froze, the coldness seeping into my bones, locking me in place. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world around me seemed to fade into the background, and all I could focus on was the darkness behind me, the emptiness of the figure's presence. "You can't leave," it whispered again, its voice now a low, guttural growl, vibrating in my chest. "You belong here. You've always belonged here." My heart was pounding in my ears. As I turned slowly to face it, the figure was no longer standing just outside the truck. It was right there, inches away, its featureless face close enough that I could feel the coldness of its breath on my skin. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but the terror had gripped me so tightly that my body refused to obey. I tried to step back, but the figure moved with me. Every time I took a step, it took one closer. "No," I gasped, my voice shaking. "No, you're not real." But it didn't stop. The figure reached out, its hand moving slowly toward my chest, and I felt a cold pressure in my chest like it was trying to crush my very soul. "You are real," it whispered, its voice like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. "You've always been real. You just refuse to see it." My mind raced. The world around me spun as I fought to understand what was happening. The fear was so overwhelming, it felt like I was suffocating. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought flickered, a realization. The figure, it wasn't just following me. It wasn't just haunting me. It was inside me. Everything I had feared, everything I had tried to bury was manifesting before me. The figure was a reflection of my own guilt, my own doubts, my own weaknesses that I had never confronted. It was the darkest part of me.
It was now more real than ever.
"No, I don't belong here," I whispered, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure smiled, its grin widening impossibly, the emptiness of its face consuming everything around it. "You've always been one of us," it repeated, its voice growing louder, more deafening. "We've been waiting for you. We'll always be here. You'll never escape." And just like that, the world around me collapsed. The truck, the fog, the road, everything disappeared. I was plunged into a void, the blackness swallowing me whole. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. There was nothing, just the echo of the figure's voice in my head. You can't escape. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air. My heart was racing, and I was drenched in sweat. The world was normal again. The truck was parked at a rest stop. The rain was still falling, but the storm had calmed. I was alone. I looked around, trying to collect my thoughts, still shaken by the nightmare. Or was it a nightmare? My reflection, the figure, the road that seemed to stretch on forever. Was it real? Was I still dreaming? I reached for the mirror, my eyes locked on the glass. For a moment I expected to see the figure again, but there was nothing, just me. I was breathing heavily, still trying to calm myself when a soft voice whispered in my head. You can run, but you can't escape. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I spun around, but the rest stop was empty. There was no one around, yet the words lingered in the air, haunting, unsettling. I couldn't escape, not from this place,
Yes.
not from myself, but maybe, just maybe, that was the truth I had been running from all along. You can run from the world, but you can never escape yourself. Only when you face your darkest fears can you be free.